You know, too many look at their marriages like kind of going to a restaurant. You know, you order what you want, but when you see what everybody else at the table got, you kind of wish you'd ordered that. And I'm afraid that's the way a lot of people kind of approach their marriage. Marriage and divorce data for the U.S. in 2022 are better than the numbers than we used to hear, and in some ways, and they're about the same, really. In 2022, there were 2,065,905 marriages in the year of 2022. The number of divorces were 673,989. That's less than 1 in 3 percentage-wise. Of course, that's not statistic. You can't go by that. That's not statistically correct. If you have 500,000 divorces and 1 million marriages, there haven't been half of marriages don't end in divorce. That's not the way that works. That's making statistics tell you anything you want it to say. When it's about half, it's about 1 in 4. And when it's a third, it's about 1 in 6. So actually divorce has dropped, it seems, in the United States, at least in 2022. The church is married, or really it's more appropriate to say the church is betrothed to Christ. We're not actually married to Christ yet. The wedding feast has not happened. We have not entered into that time yet, but we are betrothed to Christ. And that's the terminology that's used. 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 2 says, "For I am jealous for you with godly jealousy, for I betrothed you to one husband, that I may present you as a chaste virgin to Christ." So you've not been, if you will, presented to Christ yet until that day. So to abandon even a betrothal, though, in the Scriptures, a betrothal was considered a marriage. So while I'm saying what I'm saying, you understand that it's not like an engagement now. You get engaged now, you're not married. Okay, that's a different situation. And you don't have to go through a divorce if you're engaged and you break it off. But the way they operated, a betrothal was counted as a marriage. And once you were betrothed, to get out of the betrothal, you had to go through a divorce. Okay? That's the way it was in the New Testament. So, to even get out of a betrothal required a putting away or a divorcement. And that, if you're a little iffy on that, go to Matthew chapter 1. You'll see verses 18 and 19. It says, "Now the birth of Jesus Christ was as follows. After his mother, Mary, was betrothed, after his mother Mary was betrothed to Joseph before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Spirit." So that's Jesus' mother, was betrothed to Joseph. Verse 19, it says, "Then Joseph, her husband," see, even refers to him as her husband, even though they were only betrothed, "being a just man and not wanting to make her a public example, was minded to put her away secretly." So while they had not come together, it wasn't a full marriage yet. It was considered a betrothal, yet they were considered husband and wife. So, and even though he was trying to do this very secretively and do it privately, a divorce, even in that circumstance, is not easy. It's not joyful, and it cannot be kept totally private. And nothing can in this world, especially anything like that. But the worldly among us can carelessly divorce, and we see it all the time. And it's the same way, people can carelessly divorce Christ and His church. And that happens more than you might think. People walk away from their church often. They may try to keep that private. People who quit church often try to do it in a very low-key way. They'll kind of slowly dissipate and slowly quit attending. Some will abruptly do it. Some will make a big thing about it, fuss and everything like that. But a lot of people who quit church will do it kind of slowly and quietly. But the faithful still notice it because where's brother so-and-so? Where's sister so-and-so? That still happens. Matthew 13:22 says, the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and he becomes unfruitful. We see that. You can't help but see when brethren begin to be less faithful. You can't help but notice it. So I know that you may think you sit here in church and nobody pays any attention to you. I assure you, there are people watching you all the time, and we feed off of each other in our faith. And it's important to us that you're here. It's important to us that you're faithful. And it hurts us when we see you not be the people that we know you could be. We want to see you successful and spiritually doing well. So this lesson is designed to encourage us that are what I would call shocked. There are brethren who, I don't know, maybe you just kind of new to this concept, but you may be a little shocked when there are those who divorce the church and divorce the Christ that we love and leave the rest of us sitting here kind of scratching our head and kind of wondering, why? Why did you leave? You've probably felt that. Why did you? And it feels like, by the way, it doesn't feel impersonal. It feels very personal. When somebody leaves the church, it feels like, why have you abandoned us? It doesn't just feel like, why did you abandon the Lord? It feels like, why did you abandon us? What did we do? Right? And you don't like that feeling at all. And such abandonment identifies some things about that person. It identifies who's with us. Those with us. That's what the scriptures talk about in 1 Corinthians 11:19. For there must also be factions among you. There must be. And listen to that statement. Must be. There will always be people walking away from the church. There will always be factions in the church. And it must be. Now you just need to hear that just for a second. Let that ring in your ears. Quit being shocked. There must be. Why must it happen? And here's the reason. That those who are approved may be recognized among you. You see, the ones who never leave, we notice that. In 2 Timothy 2 and verse 19, nevertheless, the solid foundation of God stands, having this seal, the Lord knows those who are His. He always has, and He always will. He knows those who are absolutely committed to Him. And He knows those who aren't. That may not... You can fool me, I can fool you, but we don't fool the Lord, right? Can't fool Him. And so also, these kind of abandonments identify who is not with us. Those not with us are like 1 John 2:19. They went out from us, but they were not of us. Now that's a big statement right there. People quit flocking with the birds they're not alike. That's right. They leave us because they are not us. That's a big eye-opener, and it's a shocking thing to people. When they see that somebody leaves, you say, well, they just got hurt. Wait, no. They left because they were not us. Listen to what it says. It's not me saying this. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have continued with us. But they went out that they might be made manifest that none of them were of us. That's a statement, isn't it? Listen to 1 John 4, verses 1 through 6, but I think verse 6 it encapsulates all of this. It says, we are of God. He who knows God hears us. Listen to that statement. You may not like this statement. This is really true. People don't want to hear what we have to say. They're not one of us. I don't care if they sit in our pews. They're not one of us. If you don't like what we teach, you're not one of us. That's just the way it is. We are of God. He who knows God hears us. He who is not of God does not hear us. Don't want to listen to that. That's just the way it is. It may sound harsh, but it is absolutely the truth. So I want to look at 7 types of divorces in Scripture. I've never done this before. So we're going to look at all the different kinds of divorces that happen in Scripture. Every one of these happen in the Bible. We want to look at these 7 different ways that people have been divorced in the Bible and apply it to how people do the same thing to Christ and His church. Same thing all over again. So we'll look at those, okay? Number one, Christ and His church may be divorced for an earthly inheritance. That's what happens in Genesis chapter 21, verses 8 through 10. Now, this is patriarchal age, and so even the divorce laws didn't exist that are in the law of Moses. So you may look at this and you say, I'm aghast that Abraham would do this. Well, listen to me. He did not live under the law of Moses. He did not live under the law of Christ. The rules were different for him. Sorry if that offends you, but there were a lot of differences about marriage and the like back then. Just be aware of what actually happened in this text. It says in verse 8, so the child grew. This is the child of Hagar. So the child grew and was weaned. I mean, not child of, this is, I got it backwards. I'm talking about Israel. I'm talking about Isaac. It says, so the child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the same day that Isaac was weaned. So that's who we're talking about. Sorry. Verse 9, and Sarah saw the son of Hagar, that is Ishmael, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, scoffing, making fun of the other child. Therefore, she said to Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, namely with Isaac. So it actually happened. The reason she's gone. Now, I got to say, Ishmael was there at Abraham's death. He actually conducted part of the funeral. So, I mean, it wasn't totally out of his life, but no inheritance, significant inheritance. But I want to say this, though, about this concept. There will always be those who will divorce themselves from the church and from Christ for the sake of money. There will always be those who will quit church to make more money. And they will avoid hearing anything about money. In fact, I've known people virtually quit church because you're talking about giving. Don't want to hear that. Don't want to hear anything about that sort of thing. So I'm just telling you, it happens. You may be shocked that that happens, but it does happen. The second one I want you to see is that Christ and His church may be divorced, not just about an earthly inheritance, but about an earthly freedom. This is an interesting passage. This is after the Ten Commandments in Exodus chapter 21, verses 1 through 6. But if you buy a Hebrew servant, that is one of your fellow Hebrews, if you buy a Hebrew servant, he shall serve 6 years. That's the maximum you could have a Hebrew or one of your fellow Hebrew people as a slave. He shall serve 6 years, and in the 7th he shall go out free and pay nothing. Well, that's interesting, but that's not what we're looking at here. Verse 3, if he comes in by himself, he shall go out by himself. Right? If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. Great. Verse 4, if his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. Now that means if he leaves in that situation, he just left that wife. You pick that up? That's exactly what that means. But if the servant plainly says, I love my master, I love my wife and my children, I will not go out free, then his master shall bring him to the judges, and he shall also bring him to the door or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever to stay with his wife. But listen to what the law allowed. The law allowed him, just for his sake of freedom, to be free of that woman and the children and that man. Now, here's the truth. There will always be those who will divorce themselves from Christ and the church for the sake of what they call freedom. To live as they please. To do as they wish. Religion and the Bible can be too restricted for people. They will feel like, oh, I feel restricted. They're always telling me what I can do. This happens a lot of times to our teenagers. They do whatever their parents say, go along with it. Go off to college. I'm done with that. Throw it off, and they're gone, and never go to a church again. That's the idea of divorcing Christ and His church for the sake of their own freedom. Oh yes, it does happen. Number 3, Christ and his church may be divorced for an earthly abuse. This is also in that Exodus 21. This is under the law of Moses. Verses 7 through 11, it says, "And if a man sells his daughter to be a female slave, she shall not go out as the male slaves do. If she does not please her master who has betrothed her to himself, then he shall let her be redeemed. He shall have no right to sell her to a foreign people, since he hath dealt deceitfully with her." Verse 9, "And if he has betrothed her to his son," now this is a man who has a young girl that now is his slave. "If he has betrothed her to his son," going to marry his son, "he shall deal with her according to the custom of daughters." So just as if even if she's a foreigner and she has now been purchased, she is owned by this man, you deal with her like he's even among your own family. Verse 10, here's the interesting part. Verse 10, "If he takes another wife," so again, law of Moses, you're allowed to have multiple wives, right? Listen to the last part of this, because the Jews use this particular argument as a reason to this day that you can get a divorce for a couple of these reasons. It says, "If he takes another wife, he shall not diminish her food, her clothing, or her marital rights. And if he does not do these 3 for her, she shall go out free without paying money." And now she gets set free, and she was a slave, and she has to pay nothing just because he reduced any of the things he's obligated to. What's a man obligated to give to his wife, according to that text? Food, clothing, and conjugal rights. The conjugal rights are so important because you had to be able to have children. That's your Social Security. That's your retirement package. So there will always be those who are willing to divorce themselves from Christ and the church for the sake of their sense of being abused. In this text, that would be considered abuse. If you diminished my food, my clothing, or my conjugal rights, you would be abusing me. And by the way, this is an argument for getting out of a relationship that is abusive. But these women, that's what would happen to them, and they could get out of that. So the woman, I know a lot of people will tell you in the Old Testament a woman could not divorce her husband. This is a clear case of a woman divorcing her husband. So a lot of people talk that don't know what the Bible actually teaches. Okay, just remember that. So this is a clear case of a woman doing that very thing. There will always be those who will divorce themselves from Christ and the church for their sense of being abused. I'm going to tell you straight up, there are people who feel like the church or somebody at church has abused them. Somebody hurt my feelings. Somebody wasn't nice to me. Somebody didn't talk to me just right. Somebody wasn't sweet to me. And they will quit the church over somebody at church who wasn't the way they ought to be at church. What a silly thing to do, folks. What a silly thing to do. But people will do it. People will they'll accuse you, "Oh, well, you don't let women lead the church." Or you won't let me be an elder here. Okay? Folks, there are people who will quit because they will feel abused. Just because they feel abused. And then they'll justify it. I want to come back to that self-justification, because everything I'm talking about, if you really listen to what I'm saying, each one of these is a self-justification purpose. Listen to it carefully. It's a lie you tell yourself. Number 4, church and Christ may be divorced for an earthly betrayal. Here's another reason in the Old Testament that people would get out of a relationship. It's in Deuteronomy 22, verses 13 through 21. It says, "If a man takes a wife," now he's already been betrothed to her, "and goes, because he's called his wife, and goes into her and detests her," that means he finds out what he's fixed to say the next thing, "and charges her with shameful conduct." In other words, she wasn't a virgin, she had been running around, and brings a bad name on her and says, "I took this woman, and when I came to her, I found she was not a virgin." Verse 15, "Then the father and mother of the young woman shall take and bring out the evidence of the young woman's virginity to the elders of the city at the gate." They actually kept the bed clothing. Verse 16, "And the young woman's father shall say to the elders, I gave my daughter to this man as wife, and he detests her. Now he has charged her with shameful conduct, saying, now, by the way, he could have probably gotten a divorce just by saying he detests her. We'll get to that in a moment. But nonetheless, he's charging her with shameful conduct that she had not been found a virgin. He said, I found your daughter was not a virgin. In verse 17 now, Deuteronomy 22. And yet these are the evidences of my daughter's virginity, and they shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city. Verse 18, then the elders of the city shall take that man and punish him. So he's going to be punished, but there's more. And verse 19, and they shall fine him 100 shekels of silver and give them to the father of the young woman, because he's been offended, because he's brought a bad name on a virgin of Israel, and she shall be his wife. He cannot divorce her all his days, because he's made a false accusation. Verse 20, but if the thing is true and evidence of the virginity are not found for the young woman, then they shall bring out the young woman to the door of her father's house, and the men of the city shall stone her to death with stones. And you say, oh, well, then they had to kill her. No, you remember Joseph wasn't going to kill Mary. He was accusing her of the same kind of thing, because she has done a disgraceful thing in Israel to play the harlot in her father's house. So you shall put away the evil from among you. He was not going to do that. So you didn't have to kill her, but you could have killed her. But the point is that it was for betrayal. And there will always be those that will try to divorce the church or to try to divorce Christ out of their life because they feel like they've been betrayed. Somebody wasn't friendly to them the way they felt they should, and they won't apologize. They've hurt them, and they will not make it right. Folks, listen to me. I'm going to tell you a little secret. Somebody in the church is going to do you wrong, and they're never going to say sorry. Wake up. Don't quit the church. You hearing me? It's going to happen. If it ain't happened, it's coming into a theater near you. Okay? You don't get to quit just because somebody won't apologize, just because you feel like you were betrayed by somebody at church. Don't quit. Number 5, Christ and his church may be divorced for an earthly uncleanness. That's what comes up in Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4. When a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she find no favor in his eyes because he found some uncleanness in her, and he writes her a certificate of divorcement, and he puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house when she had departed from her house and goes and becomes another man's wife, which of course she can because she's been divorced. She's no longer married. Verse 3, if the latter husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorcement, puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, or if the latter husband dies who took her as the wife, then her former husband who divorced her must not take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled, that matter of uncleanness. For that is an abomination before the Lord, and you shall not bring sin on the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. There will always be those who will try to divorce themselves from Christ and the church for the sake of a desire for uncleanness. There's always going to be something unclean. You say, well, what's uncleanness? Well, in the text, it never defines what uncleanness is. So it's any sin that's a problem. You say, well, what sins could be a problem? There's 1,000 sins that can become a problem if you don't understand that. So 1,000 reasons that people will use. They want to do things, and they refuse to give their sin up, and because the church is harping on the thing that they do, then I don't want to be around that anymore. That's 1,000 things. Matter of uncleanness. Number 6, Christ and his church may be divorced for an earthly unbelief. This is an interesting one. This is Jeremiah chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. And in this text, it's God violating his own law of Deuteronomy 24. It's which kind of interesting. If you want to read something be interesting, read Deuteronomy 24 and then Jeremiah chapter 3, because God violates his own law. It says, Jeremiah 3 verse 1 says, they say if a man divorces his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's, may he return to her again. Would not that the land be greatly polluted? But you have played the harlot with many lovers, yet return to me, says the Lord. So the very thing that he didn't want them to do, he's going to do with his people. Verse 6, dropping down that text, I don't have time to read the whole thing. Verse 6 says, the Lord said also to me, in the days of Josiah the king, have you seen what backsliding Israel has done? She has gone on every high mountain and under every green tree. This is referring to worshiping other gods. and there played the harlot. So it's not talking about literally playing the harlot. It's mainly about giving themselves over to other faiths or giving up on the faith that they had. Verse 7, and I said, after she had done all these things, return to me, come back to me, even though you committed adultery with a false god. But she did not return. And her treacherous sin, Judas saw it. Then I saw that for all the causes for which backsliding Israel had committed adultery, I put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Judah did not fear, but went and played the harlot also. As you know, God basically disowned the northern kingdom, and it was taken away in 3 different carryings away. Later, Judah's carried away in 3 different carryings away into Babylonian captivity. Verse 9, so it came to pass through her casual harlotry that she defiled the land and committed adultery with stones and trees. Again, idolatry. Verse 10, and yet for all this, her treacherous sister Judah has not turned to me with her whole heart, but in pretense. So even her turning, Judah's turning away from that, it was only in pretense. There will always be those who will divorce themselves from Christ and the church for the sake of not believing. I'm going to say something here that may shock some of you. There are people sitting here tonight that don't believe what we believe. I've known deacons that didn't believe in God. Told me so. So don't be shocked. I know you think I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm telling you straight up. Everybody that says they believe don't believe. Some folks say they believe, and they're just feigned pretending it. And they don't actually believe it. You can tell it by the way they live, but nonetheless, there will always be those, for the sake of not believing the Bible or believing virtually nothing, well, they may be agnostic or atheists almost, but nonetheless, they will quit the church because of unbelief. They may use other religions as their excuse, but really, they just don't want to have anything to do with what we believe. That's for real. Number 7, Christ and His church may be divorced for an earthly immorality. Now, this is the passage that you know familiar with because we live under Christ, and everything I've talked about before this was either the old law or under the patriarchal system. Matthew 5, verses 31 32, it says, furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of a divorce. But I say to you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Here's the point, though. There will always be those who will divorce themselves from Christ and the church for the sake of a desire to be immoral. Fornication, adultery, homosexuality, and trans stuff that's going on today, all of that will be justified. And it's back to my point. Remember what I said? Every one of these people self-justify themselves. Every time you've ever seen anybody quit the church, I've got a lot of experience in this. Every time anybody ever quits Christ and quits the church, they feel justified. I know that's a shocker. You would think they wouldn't feel. They feel justified in what they're doing. Whether it's for inheritance or money, freedom, they just want to do whatever they want to do. Abuse, oh, somebody's mistreated me. Betrayal, somebody betrayed me at church. Uncleanness, I want to be able to do whatever I want to do and I don't want anybody telling me not to do it. Unbelief, I don't actually believe what they believe up there. Or immorality. They feel justified. Let me give you an example of this. You know, as in all divorces, the one that files for the divorce almost always feels justified. Even if they're the one that committed adultery. I know that may come as a shock. Yeah, you probably not dealt with these people quite as much, but just about everybody thinks they're right in what they did. It reminds me of how people make excuses about work. Because if I'm late, I have a good reason. For example, 51% of all excuses for not being to work on time is traffic. Okay. 31% of all being late to work is, well, I overslept this morning. 28% is, well, the weather was bad. Okay. But here's some that I think you'll appreciate more. These are actual excuses that have been made for people who were late to work. Here's one. I was here. I drove here. I parked in the parking lot, and then I fell asleep. Another one is, my fake eyelashes stuck together. Another one is, an astrologer warned me of a car accident on the highway, so I had to take all the back roads. These are real. These are real excuses. Here's the best one though. I had morning sickness. This was a man gave that as a reason. I had morning sickness. I guess he didn't know what morning sickness was. Why do people believe their own lies? Why do people believe their own self-justification? Why do they do that? Because you know it's a lie. It really is a lie. Why do people believe it? According to Nautilus, which has done a science piece on this, they looked into what happens to our brains when we don't tell the truth. Here's what they discovered. It turns out that the more you lie, the more truthful the lie seems to you. Because while a lie might initially appear to the brain as a lie, and the fabricated memory set off your brain's alarm system, over time, the source mentoring fatigues. It literally, your brain fatigues with each fib you tell. So lying ends up cementing the false details of the expense of the real ones. Psychologist Quinn Kroback said this, if a lie or a fabrication provides an explanation for something, it's more likely to become confused with what's true. People are casual monsters. We love knowing why things happen. And if we don't have an explanation for something, we like filling in the gaps. We lie to ourselves. This pressing human need to fill these gaps are part of the reason we end up believing our own lies. Psychology professor Carrie True said this, if I tell the lie to multiple people, I'm rehearsing the lie. The more you repeat something, the more you actively imagine it, the more detailed and the more vivid it becomes. It becomes more real to you, which further exploits the brain's tendency to conflate details with veracity. In other words, the more details you give to your lie, the more you feel like you're telling the truth. The process is at work in every self-rationalizing and self-justifying thing that we do. Listen to me. You may not think you do this, but there's probably not a person in here that doesn't lie to themselves or to others occasionally. We tend to justify what we did, and we tell the story slightly brighter for us than we do the other person. Pay attention. I'm not talking about the other person. I'm talking about you and me. So what we believe to be true about ourselves ends up being kind of false because we're plagued by this faulty wiring thing where we keep telling the same story enough that even we start believing it. Regularly confessing, therefore, listen to this. This is a summary of that study. Regularly confessing one's frailty in this regard might just reset the brain's falsehood fatigue and bring you closer to the truth that sets you free. What does that mean? Be quicker to admit maybe you got it wrong. Maybe I'm misremembering it. Stop self-justifying, else you too may end up at some point in your life thinking that you have a right to divorce the church or to divorce Christ and to stop going because X, Y, and Z. And now because X, Y, and Z is now A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, you've come up with more stuff that you tagged onto it. And now you feel absolute justice. In fact, you can feel so justified that you will even condemn the Lord over something He might have said to be right. It becomes so important for you to be right that you will justify yourself no matter what. Now listen to me, what I want to say to y'all. By the way, all of those of you who are still here, who haven't actually done this, you haven't actually done this, you've not divorced Christ, you've not divorced the church, you're still trying to be faithful to Him, listen, be encouraged. You're on the right path. Just don't go down that path of self-justification. When someone challenges something you've said, be quick to say, you know, I might have got that wrong. Might have been wrong about that. Because if you don't do that, self-justifying will lead to getting rid of the rest of us. Because one of us is going to offend you sooner or later. One of us is going to say something or do something that wasn't just right for you. It's going to happen. You might not have been perfect in it either, but can you accept that? And are you willing to accept that maybe I'm wrong? Invitations are for those willing to confess sin. Can I tell you the big lie? You don't need to confess any sin. You heard it? You hadn't done anything wrong. There's nothing you should ever confess to anybody. That's the big lie. That's that little person inside of you saying, well, yeah, but. That's why the Bible calls us to humility and confession of sin. If you're here tonight and you need to come forward, we'll pray for you. But you know what? There's not a person in here probably that couldn't come forward and ask for prayer for something. So let's be a little more humble, amen? And don't self-justify and end up divorcing Christ and His church.